The White House has ordered the release of thousands of documents on the murder of US President John F. Kennedy in full for the first time. More than 97% of records in the collection are now publicly available. A 1964 US inquiry, the Warren Commission, found Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, a US citizen who had previously lived in the Soviet Union, and that he acted alone. Joining me now live is political analyst at Curtin University, Professor Joe Siracusa. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. What do these papers contain? Is it likely we'll see any bombshells?
Good afternoon, Danica. Well, no, but we get a thorough investigation of who was redacted and who wasn't redacted, and it's very important. Look, the United States is never going to give up trying to solve this case, and keep in mind that the public will only ever get about 5% of what an administration does. I mean, all the rest is destroyed or is phone transcripts and the like. Look, only 29% of the American people ever believed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Now, they were pretty convinced that he was the shooter. And then 2 days later, he was shot by another loner. What are the odds of that? And when the commission came out, or just before the commission came out, President Johnson asked the CIA to look into this. Now, President Johnson did not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. The KGB didn't believe it. The FBI didn't believe it. The CIA, nobody believed it. I mean, nobody with any access to Washington believed it. Now, the FBI was told, according to documents that I saw a couple of years ago, the telegrams or the communications, that the KGB said they had proof that it was a Texas oil conspiracy. Now, President Johnson was in a very conservative country, the John Bircher Society crowd, and he even said to his wife that morning, "This is a good day to get shot," because it was a sunny day, etc. And he was in killer land, and of course he's in an open convertible, which is a target. And so the story goes, according to the KGB, and then the story they supposedly told the CIA, and that's the 3% we don't have. I think the CIA worked out that there may have been a plausible case for a Texas conspiracy, but you can hardly say that you have proof that the president of the United States, the 36th president of the United States, organized for the 35th president of the United States. And keep this in mind, Danica, and people in Australia don't really understand this. There have only been 46 presidents. 5 of them have been murdered since 1865. 12 of them have been shot at, 2 of them injured. Your chances of being shot at or being killed as a president are about 35%. That's not much of a job description, is it? And so these guys are always open targets. But look, I think it's pretty clear that Lee Harvey Oswald was involved, and I think it was pretty clear that whoever used him as a patsy, and that they found out that he psychiatrically he probably wasn't fit to keep a secret, and so they had to eliminate him. And the conspiracy goes on. Now, Norman Mailer, the great American writer, said in a big book on Lee Harvey Oswald that he was a monster with the soul of a killer, and he could have done it if he had a chance. And Mailer says that on the day, maybe 2 or 3 people took a shot at the president, all unbeknownst to each other, which is a possibility, of course, when a great man or a great person comes onto the scene. But I think there's a lot more we have to know, and we're never going to know. But look, this is the great unsolved crime of the 20th century. This is the ultimate cold case. And I think the CIA records will show, when they are unredacted one day, that they had a case that the smoking gun was in the Oval Office and that Lyndon Johnson was deeply involved in a Texas conspiracy. But look, Lee Harvey Oswald, there was a dossier on him. He was on the radar. They could see where he was. He was going in and out of the Russian embassy in Mexico. He'd gone to Russia as he defected there. I mean, he was prime material. But at the end of the day, even the KGB watched him when he got to America. When he got back to America, he was the loose cannon here. But he's the guy who probably shot the president, or one of the guys. And Lee Harvey, and he in turn was shot by a man who had terminal cancer. And so the great mystery goes on. Yeah,
it does go on. And it'll be fascinating to read. But that 3%, as you said, still hasn't quite yet been released. I want to move on now. Let's talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine. A Russian commander this week was quoted as saying that Russia can't defeat the NATO bloc in Ukraine without using nuclear weapons. February will be 12 months since this conflict started. Do you believe that nuclear weapons are a possibility still as we head into the new year?
Absolutely. Danica, this is the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in that crisis, the Russians had, I think, 51 tactical nuclear weapons on the island that they got there and got off without anyone knowing. And we know about it later on through conferences that took place. They had all these weapons, and they were under the command of the theater commanders there, that is, the head local commanders, who could have used them. There'd have been no call to the Kremlin at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they had worked out a figure that I've seen, and that when the odds were 10 to 1 against them in terms of conventional weapons, when they were outnumbered by men, tanks, and all the rest of it, they reserved the right to use tactical nuclear weapons, as indeed all the nations today who have tactical nuclear weapons. So I don't think the Russians would hesitate to use a tactical nuclear weapon, particularly when those Patriot missiles start to arrive in Ukraine. They're going to say that the odds against them are 10 to 1. They can't. It's not a fair fight anymore. They don't think this has been a fair fight. You know, they think that Germany and France betrayed them in the Minsk agreement a couple of years ago, and that they were double-crossed by the United States on the balance of terror, or the balance of nuclear terror in that part of the world. So, you know, they've got nothing to lose. And I think the tip-off to me is, and this is a big deal, is that there's only one remaining nuclear agreement, Danica, between Russia and the United States. It's a START agreement, and the Russians recently called off negotiations, and the Americans had no answer to that. And so we got this lost art of making nuclear treaties at a time when we have the two remaining great superpowers, and they both have thousands of nuclear weapons, strategic weapons, as well as tactical weapons, to do a great deal of damage. So, you know, when you're not negotiating, and you don't trust your former friends, that's France and Germany, I reckon, you know, you just you're going to roll the dice, particularly if the Russians sense for a minute, Danica, that the Americans have given the Ukrainians the green light to attack deep into Russian territory. And keep in mind, it's only 450 miles, or 800K, between the Ukrainian border and Moscow. So it doesn't take much for a missile to get there and knock out Mr. Putin in his sleep. So he knows that. The lead time now is about 10 minutes. So they have real concerns. And as I say, we're trying to figure out how to keep them on side. At the end of the day, I think we're going to have a negotiated settlement, but not before Ukraine has been smashed to pieces. It's going to cost about 70, 80 trillion bucks just to put the place back together. And I think we paid a very high price for this war so far.
Yeah, we certainly have already. Joe Siracusa, we need to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you.